because it does. It works out. If you take life too seriously, what is that old saying? To those who think life is a comedy, those who feel life is a tragedy. So I just try to keep it light and lively.
Sylvester Stallone is one of the biggest names in the blockbuster industry, and everyone who's anyone would give their last cent to take a picture with him. So why is not one or two, but three different states banning Sylvester Stallone? And don't even get me started on the fact that they're all within the United States. While it might seem like these stars have got everything going their way, Sylvester Stallone's life didn't always take the best turn. In fact, things started going downhill for him from the very first moment that he entered this world. When he was born, complications during labor forced doctors to use 2 pairs of forceps. In the process, they accidentally severed a nerve which caused paralysis in parts of Stallone's face. Insane, right? Who would have thought the young Stallone would ever have a chance at acting? Due to this, his face would slightly droop, and he faced a minor speech impediment, which made him the target of bullies at school. Due to the bullying and hardships at home, sometimes he would let out his frustration in school, seeing his rogue behavior, and by rogue I mean he got into fights very often.
Did they say, get a real job or something like that?
Well, that's the line in Rocky, because, you weren't born with much of a brain, so you better start using your body.
Long before he became the legendary action movie star that we all know and love, Sylvester Stallone was a bit of a troublemaker. And by a bit, I mean a lot. Imagine causing so much chaos that 3 entire states decide they've had enough of you. Sounds like a plot twist from one of his movies, right? But this is real life. In a recent episode of the Unwaxed podcast, Stallone sat down with his daughters to share some jaw-dropping stories from his youth. And trust me, they're as wild as his films. Here's the gist. Stallone recounted his school days with a mix of humor and nostalgia. He said, after they kept sending me to school after school after school, he just doesn't fit in. I go, guys, this is like the 7th school, right? Where do I fit in? Imagine being so much of a handful that 7 different schools couldn't handle you. And it didn't even end at 7. He was actually kicked out of 13 schools. 13 schools?
After they kept sending me to school after school after school, they go, he just doesn't fit in. I go, guys, it's like the 7th school.
Right.
Where do I fit in?
Looks like the universe was trying to give Stallone a giant shove in the direction of the entertainment industry. But it didn't stop there. Stallone continued, then we tried it again and they said he just doesn't fit in and we're not going to allow him back. He's such a disruptive force. We won't let him back into the state of Pennsylvania. Can you believe it? Banned from an entire state for being a disruptive student? By the time Stallone was 12 years old, he was kicked out of 13 schools for his rash behavior and had broken 11 bones. It didn't end there. Stallone also got the Golden Boot from Maryland. And by Golden Boot, I mean he was kicked out. He once reflected on this moment by saying, I was banned from the entire Maryland school system. So there you have it. Our favorite action hero had a knack for causing chaos long before Hollywood. Looks like the bad boy on bike thing wasn't just an act for Sylvester Stallone in the Expendables movies. Banned from 2 states for being too much to handle in school. That's got to be some kind of record. But it turns out that Sylvester Stallone had his father to blame for his rugged personality. As if dealing with facial paralysis was not more than enough baggage. For a young kid who had just stepped into the world, Sylvester Stallone also had to deal with his incredibly abusive father, who had a way of getting his point across with punches.
Everything I can. And the first thing is we have to learn about a little self-defense, something.
Nothing was ever resolved verbally in Stallone's household since his father was very aggressive. But to make matters worse, physical arguments were common between them. According to Stallone, he was no stranger to serious pain, and he and his brother had to deal with a lot of violence and trauma as kids. He once buttressed on this point by talking about the fact that recounting one such incident that happened when he was just 13 years old, where his father had dragged him off a horse by the scruff of his neck during a polo match. But that's not all. It turns out that Sylvester Stallone's mother also went through her fair share of trouble. Luckily for Stallone, his mother and father's bittersweet relationship ended during his last few years in high school, but he moved to Philadelphia soon afterward. Till today, Sylvester Stallone is convinced that his father was envious of his achievements. He once spoke about this in an interview with fellow filmmaker John Hertzfeld, where they talked about Frank Stallone Sr. But let's cut to the chase. Sylvester Stallone has gotten into more issues with the law than a drunk driver on Candy Lane. But then again, this is what exactly got Sylvester Stallone the off-you-go warrant from 3 different states. Sylvester Stallone didn't pee on the streets or some other outrageous crime. He was only a troublemaker in school. Although it's fair to say that after being bullied by your age mate for having a speech problem, you would also develop a tough bone and try to take things out on others before they can make their move on you. But here's where things critical. You've probably been wondering about the kind of antics young Stallone was up to that got him kicked out of 13 different schools. Well, it turns out he was a bit of a class clown, but on a whole different level. From disrupting classes to pulling pranks that went way too far.
Everybody has to see that because they know it's 2 indomitable forces, and out of that can only become a great scenario, a great scene.
Young Stallone was the epitome of a problem child. Picture this: prank wars that escalated to new heights, arguments with teachers that were more dramatic than a Rocky fight scene, and a general refusal to fit into the cookie-cutter mold that schools often try to enforce. It's no wonder the school systems eventually said, "Enough is enough." But what's really interesting is how all those years of rebellion shaped him. Stallone's early experiences of not fitting in, of being told he was too much of a coconut head, only fueled his desire to carve his own path. And carve it he did, right into Hollywood stardom. It's almost poetic how the kid who couldn't fit into any school became a global icon precisely because he refused to conform. But apparently, this wasn't the last of Sylvester Stallone's encounter with the law cause some time back. Sylvester Stallone was fined and had to pay court costs totaling $10,651 after being officially found guilty of smuggling banned muscle-building hormones into Australia.
A court in Australia has formally convicted Sylvester Stallone of importing restricted muscle-building hormones into the country.
According to Deputy Chief Magistrate Paul Cloran of New South Wales, he did not produce a legitimate prescriptions for the several vials of human growth hormone discovered in his baggage upon his arrival in Sydney for a promotional tour. Prosecutors claimed that Stallone had legally obtained testosterone for medical purposes, but he neglected to report its presence on a customs entrance form. Even though Stallone had already pled guilty, he was not present in court. When Cloran penalized him $2,451 for the 2 crimes and ordered him to pay $8,200 for prosecution costs. Although he did not have the prescription on hand, the actor informed customs officials that he had bought the medications from a pharmacy in Los Angeles. Stallone threw 4 vials of testosterone, a male hormone, out of his Sydney hotel room when customs authorities came to search it 3 days later. Although he failed to tell them of the fact that he was under steroids, the cops later found out that he had been using it lawfully under medical supervision, while taking a testimony from Stallone's doctor, Robert Huizenga of Beverly Hills. Sylvester Stallone, who was 60 years at the time, revealed that he had been taking the medications for years to manage a hidden medical ailment and apologized for a terrible mistake in a letter he sent to the court.
Stallone has previously apologized for the incident, calling it a terrible mistake. He also said that the drugs were to treat an undisclosed medical condition.
Since the case was resolved in a local court rather than a federal one, Stallone was subject to a maximum penalty of $18,000 for each of the 2 offenses. But he did not face any jail time. So, the next time you watch a Stallone movie and see all those epic moments, remember that behind the action, Hero was a kid who was too wild for school. And let's not forget the fact that he's also a kid who was literally banned from 2 states for being too much to handle. But honestly, we wouldn't have it any other way. That's all on today's video. If you enjoyed it, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on more content like this. Also, drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Sylvester Stallone and his love for getting into trouble.